In this video, we're going to take a look at this cheap, sub £100 mini PC from Banggood.com. So, full disclosure, Banggood did send me this to review, free of charge. However, I was actually looking at one of these anyway for a specific application, so I'm going to give my full honest opinion on it. They're not telling me what to say. I will be doing a full review and evaluation of this machine purely based on my opinions. So we'll take a look at it. So this is quite a low cost machine. It currently costs £78 from Banggood. There's a link in the description if you're interested in buying it. And it's a pretty nice little machine. So you can see the specs on the back here. It's an Intel Atom X5 Z8350 processor, which is a quad-core Atom. It's obviously not very powerful, but it does a reasonable job and it's fairly power efficient. And it's not like super outdated. This was released in 2016, so it's a fairly modern CPU. You also get the standard Intel HD graphics, only 2 gigs of RAM, 32 gig eMMC storage, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, Gigabit Ethernet, and it runs Windows 10. So let's take a look at it. So the box is pretty boring. It seems as though they're trying to make it look a bit like an Intel product because they've got the big Intel Inside logo here, and up here it's all sort of the sort of CPU die design they do, which looks very much like an Intel CPU box. Obviously it's not remotely an Intel sanctioned product, but they're sort of maybe trying that a little bit with the box. But yeah, let's take a look at what we get. So, see what's inside. So first thing we get is system activation instructions. So again, sort of very Intel-like design here. So let's see what this is. I think this is about activating Windows. There we go. Well, this looks pretty interesting. Part of the end customer feedback, Intel Mini PC no license, was mistaken for piracy system. In fact, the company's Intel products in the engineering mode has been injected into the license, but the system cannot be identified to license. The first boot license input interface, select the do not do this later after entering the system, will automatically activate the network in the background, the following as a guide, and provides something, queries parent license judgment. It's trying to be English. I think it's just telling you how to activate Windows. It does claim it's a genuine activated copy of Windows, so it'll be interesting to see. I'll probably do a little test, like I'll maybe try and install from my own install media and see if it accepts the license. But I think what this is telling you to do is not enter a key if you're asked, and instead ignore it, and it'll pick it out from the UEFI on the machine. So yeah, that's about how to activate Windows. It'll be interesting to see if we actually need to do that, and also interesting to see if it is genuinely a genuine copy of Windows. Next up, you just get a sort of instruction manual, user operations guide. It shows you how to plug it in. I don't really need that. And there's a QR code for a video tutorial. Be interesting to see what that's like. And now we get the machine itself. So that's the machine there. We'll take a look at that in a sec. You then get a standard UK power adapter. So this is a little 12-volt power brick. It feels reasonably weighty. I obviously can't assess the quality fully, but it doesn't feel too bad. Although interestingly, this is actually a UK power adapter, but they also included a big Clive-esque depth adapter. So I guess you also didn't realise that it did include a UK power brick. So yeah, you've got a nice depth adapter you can put that into, and just if you wanted a bit more danger on your power adapter. But yeah, if you're buying things from China, don't use these adapters, please. They're bad. Yep. But yeah, it came with one of those. But I'm not going to use it. And that was me throwing it across the room and it hitting something. What else do you get? So you get these, which we'll take a look at in a sec. There should be two, maybe only one. Okay, so you get this. It's supposedly some sort of... yeah, so this is the Visa mounting bracket for it. So there's this little metal bar here you can mount to the back of a monitor, and then there's screws to fasten the machine onto that. We'll take a look at how all this works in a minute. When I'm using this, I won't be using it on the back of a monitor, but these brackets are also great for wall mounting it. So you could wall mount this behind the TV, which will be my final application for this, because you can screw this to a wall. So we'll take a look at that later. You also get a pair of HDMI cables, which is quite a nice little touch. One really short one and then one really long one. So there's a nice little short HDMI cable. Feels fairly decent quality. Interestingly, they're labelled HDA rather than HDMI. Wonder if that's some sort of licensing thing. They had to license the name, so they didn't. And then here's the other one, which is just another HDMI cable, just a longer one. So that's a nice touch getting those included. But now let's look at the more interesting thing, which is actually the machine itself. So here it is. It's in this little bag, so let's take it out and see what it's like. So that's the machine. It actually feels quite nice. It's got a reasonable bit of weight to it, so it doesn't feel like it's going to float away. So it feels fairly well made. It's sort of matte on the top, sort of rubberized finish on the bottom. If you felt like a sort of older ThinkPad, that's very much what it's like, sort of rubbery coating. And then on the sides it's quite glossy. So that's going to be an absolute fingerprint magnet, but I'm sure it's fine. So now let's take a look at the I/O. So on the side here you get an SD card slot. Yep, that is full-size SD. A pair of USB 2 ports, power switch, DC 12 volt input, a USB 3 port, an HDMI port, which is again just labelled HD, so I'm guessing that's again a licensing thing. One thing to bear in mind is that even though the box does claim that it's 4K capable, it sort of is, but the HDMI port's only HDMI 1.4. So it will do 4K, but only at 30 frames a second, so bear that in mind. Also the CPU in this, we'll try it out later, but if you're going to do 4K properly, you probably want a bit more power than this. There's your gigabit Ethernet port, and a headset jack, so that's headphone and microphone combined. This side then has a VGA port, which, for something like this that can be mounted to the back of a monitor, having a VGA port could be good because you could use these with old monitors in certain settings if you wanted very low cost sort of internet terminals or something. Then on the front there's absolutely nothing. So it's quite a nice looking device. So it says Z83 there, because the model of this is technically the Z83 they call it. And down here is the Intel Inside logo, again making it look like quite an Intel product even though it's obviously not. On the back you just see some information about power consumption and serial number and stuff. So yeah, that is the outside of the device. Okay, so I now have it all hooked up. So we have the PC here. I've got it connected to the TV over HDMI using the included cable, and I've connected to the network over Ethernet for the Windows activation that it mentioned. I'm then just using this wireless Logitech K400R to use the keyboard and mouse. This is what I'll ultimately be using with it as well, so the receiver is just plugged into the machine. Although it does have Bluetooth, so you could use a Bluetooth keyboard and mouse if you wanted as well. So I'm just going to plug it in and see if it switches on automatically, and then we'll set it up. Let's plug it in. Yep, and the little blue lights come on the front of it, and that looks like it's starting up. Okay, so it seems to have gone off again, so maybe I need to press the button. Nope. Hold the button down a little bit. Okay, so it seems to be on again. There we go. Yep, it's definitely pretending to be Intel. Yeah, so it's coming up with Intel. And we'll see what it does now. And it seems to be starting Windows. So Windows is now booting up on it. It won't be the world's fastest boot process, even though it is technically solid state storage. It is eMMC, so it's not fast solid state, it's just solid state. It's like an SD card almost. But that's it starting up into Windows. So we'll see what sort of welcome we get here. Just a moment. So it seems to have detected the resolution correctly. That looks like 1080p. Okay, so we are now in the Windows setup. So it's asking me to pick a language. So, yep, so I can pick that. So it is multi-language Windows on here, which is good. So I'll say yes to that. And now we're getting Cortana.
Hi there, I'm Cortana, and I'm here to help.
Well, great. Just let me set the machine.
A little sign in here, a touch of Wi-Fi there, and we'll have your PC ready for all you plan to do.
Windows.
You can use your voice or the keyboard
I don't
along the way.
care.
And if you'd like me to stay quiet, just select the sound icon.
Yes, go away.
If you need an assistive screen reader, press the Windows Control and Enter keys at the same time to enable narrator.
No, go away.
Okay, enough intro. Let's dig in.
Yes. See Windows 10. Like, I don't need it to talk to me. I'll set up.
Region is set to United States.
Yes.
Is that right?
No, it's not. Does this have a microphone? No. So it's not got a microphone. yeah. Typical Cortana being completely useless in the Windows setup, but anyway, so United Kingdom, hit next. Does anyone actually set up a Windows 10 PC using Cortana? I don't know, but yeah. Keyboard layout, yes. Nope. So this is just the standard Windows out-of-box experience, which is quite good. So it seems to be a proper, OEM Windows install. It's not like it's booting to the desktop with some random unknown user in a weird language. So it seems quite good. So I'll just need to follow through this setup process, and then we'll get back into Windows and do some testing. Okay, so I've now finished the setup process, and we are now at the Windows desktop. So the setup process wasn't too bad. It was just the standard Windows 10 setup. Took a little while at points, but we're now in. So it's connected to the network, and everything seems to be working. So if we check the activation status as well, so we go to settings here, and update security, because Microsoft keep moving it, like moving the way you check activation, but it's now in here. So go to activation, and as we can see here, it's reporting that it's running Windows 10 Home, and Windows is activated apparently. I actually didn't have to do anything, nothing popped up about activation, it just worked out of the box. So that's quite a good sign. I also do apologise if the screen's flickering quite a lot on camera. I think it's the LED backlight in this TV really doesn't like being filmed, but unfortunately it's the only 1080p screen I have with an HDMI port, so I'm a little bit limited in that respect. But yeah, it seems to be working. So what I'll do now is I'll download various benchmarks and try out a few things to test the performance, and then I'll come back and report on how well it runs. Now taking a look at the power consumption, you can see that it's extremely low. Sitting idle at the Windows desktop, you can see that it's pulling between 4 and 5 watts. And now if we start Prime 95 on it to fully stress the machine out, you can see it's pulling between 7 and 8 watts. So even fully maxed out, it sits under 8 watts, so the power consumption is really low. And now as you can see here, when we're running Prime 95, the temperature is absolutely fine. It sits around 70 degrees when it's completely fully maxed out, and it only gets slightly warm to the touch. So I don't have any concerns about this machine overheating or anything. The thermals seem absolutely fine. And obviously being fanless, it's completely silent. Also notice that the clock speed is listed as being over 1.6 GHz. The CPU's stock clock speed is 1.4 GHz, so despite running Prime 95, the thermals are obviously still giving it a good enough headroom to do a turbo boost. So that's pretty good. So now let's test the speed of the eMMC storage in this using Crystal Disk Mark. So we'll run the test and we'll see what we get. So now here we have the results, and the speeds are absolutely fine for a machine of this type. You can't really expect full SSD speeds from this. While it is solid state storage, it's effectively a single 32 gig eMMC chip, so it's not like it's a full on SSD. However, the speeds are fine. You get read speeds in excess of 100 megabytes a second. The write speeds are also okay. They're pretty much on par with a very fast hard drive. So even though you don't get incredible speeds with the storage on this, it's still more than sufficient for the applications you would be using a device like this for. Now let's take a look at one of the key uses of this machine, which would be video playback. So I tried a bunch of different video playback on it, and it actually works pretty well, with a few exceptions. So if we take a look here at an H.264 1080p file playing in the Windows 10 sort of film and TVs program, it plays brilliantly, plays completely smoothly at 50 frames a second, so that's absolutely fine. I even tried a 4K 30 frames a second file, and even that ran absolutely fine. I didn't try a higher frame rate of 4K, because the HDMI port on this doesn't support that, but it will do 4K at 30 frames a second, assuming the file's encoded correctly. I did however find very strange behaviour when I tried VLC Media Player. As you can see here, playing even a 1080p file causes it completely to break up. I'm wondering if this is due to the hardware acceleration not being compatible with VLC, but it just kept breaking up and corrupting, you couldn't actually get it to play properly. So that was a bit strange. But the built-in application into Windows works absolutely fine, and I imagine most other video players would also be okay. Now as far as streaming video in a browser goes, I tried out YouTube, which works absolutely fine at 1080p, assuming you're using H.264 encoding. So So that's under Edge, that's absolutely fine, but under Chrome it quite often defaults to the VP9 encoding, which isn't hardware accelerated. So because you can't use the H.264 acceleration built into this CPU, you're having to run the decoding entirely on the CPU itself, which results in some dropped frames, as you can see here. However, if you use a browser like Edge that just uses H.264 by default, or you use an extension with Chrome such as H.264ify, it works absolutely fine. So I installed that extension, which forces Chrome to use H.264, and now it runs YouTube absolutely perfectly. I also tried a few other streaming sites, such as BBC iPlayer, I think Channel 4 On Demand, and a few other sort of UK TV catch-up services, and they all worked fine. The only exception was if Windows was doing something in the background. So if it was running Windows Update, or Windows Defender was scanning the system or something, then it would get a bit sluggish and the video could break up. But as long as the machine's only doing the video playback and it's not doing anything in the background, it ran them absolutely fine. So for video playback, given the machine's price point and specifications, it actually does a reasonable job. I also tried installing Linux to see how well it ran. So to do this it's quite easy. You can either tell it change the boot order in the BIOS being quite limited by the way, or you can press F7 while it's booting and that will take you into the boot selection menu. One thing to note is that interestingly this machine seems to only support booting UEFI OSs. I couldn't get any sort of ISO that didn't support EFI and required legacy BIOS booting, didn't seem to work. And in the BIOS I couldn't find an option to enable this. So you will be limited to OSs that support UEFI booting. However, I was able to get it to start up into an Ubuntu live environment, and it ran okay. Ethernet was detected out of the box, however, audio and Wi-Fi did not work. So I wasn't able to get audio out at all, including over HDMI, and I couldn't get the Wi-Fi to work either. So bear that in mind. I looked it up, people are sort of talking about trying to get things like that working, but it looks all a bit bodgy and quite sort of, lots of people are trying, but it's not sort of ready for the mainstream yet. So if you want to run Linux on this for some sort of server application where all you need is Ethernet, you can probably get it going quite well. But for a general purpose device, you're probably better sticking with Windows just for having the audio and Wi-Fi support. But apart from that, you can technically boot third-party OSs onto this. I was also relatively successful installing a clean copy of Windows. So I downloaded an ISO from Microsoft's website and booted up into that, then performed a completely clean install. On the first boot, Windows wasn't activated. However, after a couple of reboots with it connected to the internet, it appeared to pick up activation automatically and now lists itself as being activated with a digital license. Before reinstalling, I also used software called ShowKey Plus to obtain the original product key, and the new install seems to accept that as well. But I didn't really need it, it did activate automatically without entering that. Interestingly, there's no sort of slick tables in the BIOS or no sort of key in the UEFI firmware that I could find, using all the sort of normal methods of reading that out. So it seems to almost be talking directly to Microsoft to activate, which is quite interesting. Although this thing will probably use more of the activation method used on things like tablets rather than full-blown Windows PCs where you'd have like a COA stuck on the case or something like that. But it does seem like a genuine copy of Windows, given that I was able to completely reinstall it and it activated automatically. The one thing to bear in mind when you're reinstalling Windows though, is the driver support. It seems as though Intel only offers the driver package for this chipset to the manufacturers. There's no download on Intel's website for it, and it's quite hard to find. I was able to find one website listing sort of drivers that were listed as supporting this machine that appear to have been obtained from another manufacturer of different but similar machines. And I was able to install those and get everything apart from the Wi-Fi working. So the HDMI audio now works, which was the main thing I needed. However, I can't seem to get the Wi-Fi working myself. I could probably fiddle about and make it work, but I don't really need the Wi-Fi. However, bear that in mind that the driver support from third isn't that great if you install your own copy of Windows. You do have to sort of go to some slightly dodgy looking third-party websites to get drivers. So just bear that in mind. However, at least I can confirm that you can do a clean install of Windows 10 and it will activate correctly, which is good. So now let's take a look at how you can mount this to the back of a monitor or small TV. So here's the mounting hardware you get. So you get this bracket, which is just a simple piece of metal. You then get 3 small screws and 3 large screws. You actually only need 2 of each type, so I think they've given an extra one in case you lose it, so we can take 2 of them away. So here you have the machine, and if you flip it over, you can see there's 2 screw holes down the bottom here. So what you need to do is just mount this bracket to those 2 screw holes with these 2 small screws, and then you can mount the bracket to the TV. So it's actually a fairly nice simple system. So just put that screw in there, drop it down and then screw it in. And of course, as I mentioned before, you can actually use this bracket to mount it on things like a wall, which is a pretty handy use case for this if you've got wall-mounted TVs. So that's the bracket now mounted to the PC, and it feels pretty secure on there. Next up, we now need to mount this to the back of the TV. So it'll fit basically in any orientation you want. However, putting it sort of this way, with the ports going out to either the left or the right, would be the most sensible because of where the power switch is. So I think if I put it this way, then you can easily reach over the top of the TV and hit the power button here. So all you need to now do is use these two screws. Bear in mind that this VESA mount will only work for small TVs. The bigger ones, like the ones I was filming earlier, won't fit this because they use a much larger VESA mounting panel. However, I suppose you could probably get some sort of adapter plate that would fit on, but it generally works better for smaller TVs or monitors. But there you go, the PC is now mounted to the back of the TV. And while it's only held on at one side, it still feels fairly secure, so I wouldn't worry too much about that coming off. And then it also actually it's quite good, it gives you decent access to the USB ports and SD card reader on the top, and you can just reach over it and hit the power button there to use it. So yeah, it does move a little bit, but it's not too bad. So that's VESA mounting. So now let's do what I always do when I get a shiny new toy, and that is take it apart. So I'm interested to see how this is built inside and how much hardware it actually has. Because the CPU is a system on chip, so it'll be interesting to see how much other supporting hardware it needs. Now there's no screws exposed on this, also it's an absolute fingerprint magnet and dust magnet. There's no exposed screws, and I don't think this sort of rubberized panel comes like coating comes off, like there's no screws under it. So I'm hoping it's just clipped together around the outside and I can just get it open with a spudger. So let's try and carefully do that without damaging it too much and see if we can get inside. Cool, so I've popped up one corner I think, so we had a little bit of headroom. So I just now need to go around the rest of it and hopefully can remove the cover. And there we go, the bottom is now off. So let's see what we have. So there we go, the first thing I can see is we've got some sort of shielding, metal shielding, but it looks like all the gubbins are actually on the underside because I can see a heatsink there. And that makes sense because that's the top of the machine. So there's now a few screws holding the motherboard in, so we just need to take those out and we can see the board. I'm hoping to be able to go fully into this and actually take the CPU out as well. Well, not take the CPU out, but take the CPU heatsink off. So assuming it's not soldered on or something stupid, I'm going to take this completely apart because I'm quite interested to see it. So there's 4 screws here. Once these are out, the board should just lift out. Looks like fairly nice looking construction so far. There we go. And yep, that's released the board. I've also noticed, oh that's slightly sticky pad. I've also noticed there's some sort of antenna in here with a wire connecting to it. So I'm guessing that's like the Wi-Fi antenna, so I'll need to be careful and not rip that off. So there we go, the board should just slide out hopefully. In theory. Seems like it's caught on, so the VGA connector seems to be catching, so I'll need to lift it out this way and try and get it around that VGA connector. There we go. There's no USB port catching on the case. There we go. It now seems to be coming out. This VGA port definitely makes it a bit tricky, but there we go. Now unfortunately they've hot glued the Wi-Fi antenna connector on, so I won't be able to get the board completely out of the case. But let's now take a look at it. Cool, so here we can see the board. So there's that soldered Wi-Fi antenna connector, and here we can see this nice large heatsink that covers all the internals, which also has a bit of hot glue dripped on it. That's obviously what was used to do that. Then down here there's a little, what looks like a CR2032 lithium cell with a couple of wires going to the underside for the CMOS battery. A couple of pin headers, don't really know what they do. There's a SIM card slot. And interestingly, that is an internal USB port. So you could potentially put some sort of flash drive in this to increase the storage. Obviously the performance wouldn't be incredible, that does only look like a USB 2 port, but that is built inside. I wasn't expecting that. So when this board is fully installed in the case, like that, you can install a flash drive in here. Or actually, if you do find that you have issues with the Wi-Fi under Linux or something, you could hide a little USB Wi-Fi adapter in here. That's a really nice touch, just having that. I was not expecting to see that there. But now we've seen that, let's try and get this heatsink off and see what's underneath. So the heatsink's held on with three tiny screws. So hopefully I can get these out and pull the heatsink off. Be interesting to see how many chips they've managed to get this down to, because it is such a low cost device. There can't be that much under here. Okay, so the screws are now removed, so let's try and get this off. Oh, that was relatively easy. Again, more hot glue sticking it down. And there we go. So under here is a thermal pad, that would have been on this chip here. And then there's a thermal pad over the main CPU as well, so try and carefully peel that off to reveal the CPU. There we go. Let's try and put that back down on the heatsink where it's meant to be. And here we go. So let's go in closer and see what we have under here. So now let's take a look at the individual chips we have on this board. So here we have the main Intel Atom System on chip, which is the X5 Z8350. So that's the CPU and GPU and a bunch of other sort of chipset related stuff on that one chip there, which is absolutely tiny. Next to it we have this little chip here, which is an AXP2880. This is a power management IC, so that must handle power management for the CPU. Then down here there's a few smaller chips. This here is the Wi-Fi chip, which is the AP6255 from Broadcom, under this little metal can here. And then there's three little Realtek chips here. This one is a Realtek RTD2166, which appears to be a DisplayPort to VGA adapter. I can't find much information on it, but someone was talking about it on a forum. So that looks like that's being used to drive this VGA connector. The next one here is a Realtek 8111G. So that is a gigabit Ethernet controller, so that'll be providing the Ethernet, which is on this connector over here. Finally, we have a larger Realtek chip. This is an ALC 5651, which is obviously an audio controller. So that'll be providing the audio for the audio jack, which is again located here. So yeah, that's everything that's on the top of the board. So now on the underside of the board, there isn't that many components, but there is this big metal can that will be covering the RAM and the storage. Now I've looked and it is just sort of like clipped, not even clipped in, it's just sort of like held in by little brackets almost. So I'm hoping if I'm careful enough, I can just lever it off like that. That was quite easy. At least it's not soldered on or anything like these sometimes are. So now we can lift this off carefully and reveal what's underneath. And there we go. Oh, there's also a thermal pad under that would be attached to nothing, interestingly. Strange. So the thermal pad actually doesn't seem to connect to anything apart from go over these like resistors here. So that's on the underside from the CPU, so I wonder if that's just to take a bit more heat away from the CPU. They've got that thermal pad there, and then another one on the other side. But yeah, so now let's take a look at the components that we're hiding under this. So under that metal can, we can now see these two chips. So this one here is made by 4C, and the model number is NCEM BSF9-32G. This chip here is the 32 gig eMMC storage, so this is the main sort of flash storage of this machine. Then over here is this chip made by, I think Elpida you pronounce it? ELPIDA. That will be the RAM. Unfortunately there's like a sort of stamp over it, so I can't quite make out the model number, But yeah, that will be the 2 gig of RAM, which is low voltage DDR3. So yeah, it's a pretty nice little design. It's very simple, you know, not many components in it, but it feels pretty well made. It's a nice little, yeah, it's a nice little board. So what I need to do is put this back together and hope I've not broken it. So I've now put the machine back together, and thankfully it still works. However, before I put the bottom on, I want to see if that internal USB port is actually active. So I've got a flash drive here. I'll try and put it in and see what happens. So shove it in there. And there we go, the drive's been detected by Windows. And sure enough, we pull up, yeah, you can pull that up there, open folder, and there we go, that is the contents of the flash drive. It's just a Windows setup drive. So that's good, you can actually hide a flash drive inside this machine, which is a pretty nice touch. The other thing you could do that would be really neat as well is I use this Logitech keyboard, which isn't Bluetooth, it uses its own Logitech unifying receiver system. So what I can do is I can unplug the receiver from outside and I can hide the Logitech receiver inside the machine. So that's now hidden away in there, but you know, it still all works. I can still use it. There we go. So yeah, that is quite a nice solution. So you could then put the bottom on and completely hide your mouse receiver inside it. That's a pretty nice touch. I was not expecting that to be in there. So yeah, that's pretty cool. So yeah, now time to put the bottom back on. So there you have it. That was a look at the Z83 Mini PC from Banggood.com. And I'm pretty impressed with it. It feels like quite a nice solid little device, power consumption is really low, and performance is pretty good. Obviously it's not the sort of device you'll replace your main PC with, but for basic office tasks and web browsing it's absolutely fine, and for media playback you can get fairly decently smooth video out of it. And yeah, it's a pretty nice device. Hardware wise it's pretty nicely built, I quite like the layout inside, and having that internal USB port is pretty cool, because you could do quite a lot with that. It opens a whole world of sort of hacking with this to, you know, mod little devices inside it. So yeah, it's a pretty nice little device. So yeah, thank you very much for watching. And obviously thank you also to Banggood for sending this over to me. And there's links in the description if you're interested in purchasing it. So yeah, thank you very much for watching.